Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is sponsored by Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with the intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Products include Westlaw, Practical Law, and Firm Central legal practice management software for small law firms. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Welcome. Access to Democracy returns. I wasn't sure for a minute there, but here we are. Alan Miller with you, and a favorite guest, retired Supreme Court Justice Paul Anderson, on a day that I'm not going to go into, but has been very unusual for us, and last-minute changes, thanks to our volunteers and thanks to the people at Eagan TV. Paul Anderson.
Well, I got to ask you a question.
Yes.
I've been here a long time, and I see your sponsors. What's Firefly?
Firefly used to be U.S. Credit Union, and a year ago they switched their name to Firefly. And now that you mention it, of course, Bill Raker, whom I met years ago and has become best friend, I met him on the Telecommunications Council, and we just got along wonderfully, and our families are very close. They just were designated, thanks to Bill, who's the president CEO of Firefly, and who works really hard. They were just designated as the number 22 in the country, credit union in the country. There was no other credit union in Minnesota that got a designation in the top 50. And I attribute so much of that and the progress that they have made and the increase in members that they have to Bill Raker, who has just been a tremendous leader and a wonderful friend. I once described him as the brother I've never had, and that's really true.
Sounds like you're pleased to have them as a sponsor.
They were our original sponsor back when this show was in swaddling clothes, and nobody knew of us, and now a few people know of us, 18, 19 years later, whatever it is.
Well, now I know who Firefly is.
And now you know who Firefly is, and I thank you for that lead-in. And there is so much to talk about since the last time you were here. I don't know where to start.
Well, I am very worried because we're doing this show on a Friday. It might not go on air till a Monday or Tuesday. We may talk about something that's ancient history, the way things are moving these days.
Well, based on the last 10 days of what's been going on in Washington, you would have to say that things are moving so fast that it's beyond my comprehension. And even in the state,
Yeah.
we have our own problems
See,
here.
one of the worries about it, I mean, they talk about attention span, whatever, is that and when things move this fast, you worry about people being able to focus on what's important. I mean, you get so caught up in the moment, and you sometimes you need to step back and think, what's going on here, what the causes are, and I hope people are going to be able to do that.
Well, you talk about attention span. I actually think that our president does not have more than a 10-second attention span. And I don't know what the reasons is. I mean, we know his narcissistic qualities. We know, we've had exposure now for 2 years to the erratic behavior of Donald Trump, but it really, in my mind, endangers our democracy. It's already changed perception of countries around the world, of the United States, and it does frighten me.
Well, let me address this a little bit. You know that I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump, and is that I've been very concerned about, his approach. I'm very concerned about how he still plays to a base that's is around in the high 30s, whatever, and it's a divisive message that he is sending out there. He seems to be okay that if he's got core supporters of the high 30%, that's all right, no play. But here's what worries me about that division is that, as you said, it's not healthy for the country. And you and I will disagree, but we should not go up to people who support Trump by saying, what's wrong with you people? We should take the extra step to understand what are the reasons. And there's a lot of fear and anxiety in the public about what's happening in this society, about jobs, health care. And so we need to try and understand what is motivating people that they want change. And
I think one of the big things is the fact that there is a large fear in a minority segment of this country that this country is no longer going to be white America. At 50 years from now, we are going to be very different in appearance than we are today. And I frankly think that scares the hell out of people, a lot of people, because, it means that they are coming in, whether it's the Mexicans, whether it's the Latinos, whether it's the black population, whether it's the Asians, and they feel threatened, and they don't know how to deal with it, especially with...
But this is not a new phenomenon. I mean, the English original settlers, they didn't like the Scots coming in, or the Irish. I mean, my ancestors who were Norwegian were called dumb Norwegians, root eaters. I mean, signs, the mayor of St. Paul has his mother telling him about signs, no dirty Irish need apply. And I'm just finishing up towards the end of the biography on Woodrow Wilson. And the anti-German, the anti-Chinese fervor in our country, it's about 100 years ago, was ratcheted up. I saw a sign, Hutchinson Hun Hunters. They labeled the German. And so it's a dynamic that we got to deal with.
A lot more of us today, however. We're now 330 million, 335 million people. And who 50 years ago heard of the Hmong contingent amongst us? And that just speaks to every ethnic minority. And it is frightening to me that people can't be accepting and recognize. I mean, I think that there are certain things that a society has to offer. Healthcare is one of them. A good economy is another. Safety, and certainly policing.
Sir, you sound like a patriot. As Jefferson talked about life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Pursuit of happiness is a theory of government. The government has a role to provide the maximum opportunity for the maximum number of people to achieve happiness. Can't guarantee it. And the things that allow people to achieve happiness are just exactly the same things you ticked off.
Well, if that's being a patriot, I would love to plead guilty to that. I think, and I'm certainly in favor of capitalism, but I'm not in favor of capitalism which has moved on to a kleptocracy.
But no. What you got to say is that you want to regulate greed, don't you?
That's what's motivating a large segment of our very wealthy population.
See, democracy.
You don't have a lot of Bill Gates. You have more Donald Trumps, and that's where we
capitalist society, capitalist civil society, will not function unless there is some regulation of unfettered greed. I mean, it's just a natural human tendency, and so. I mean, but let me talk about this. There is legitimate complaint by a good portion of the population about overregulation, bureaucratic. I mean, regulation and bureaucracy can go amok, and it cannot make sense. And then you get this anger and resentment coming back. So it's a balance. But I think you're right. There is been a tipping point or an out of balance that it's kind of that. Gordon Gekko, the greed is good.
And unfortunately, it tipped in favor of those people controlling government.
Yeah.
And they're controlling government through dollars, the monetary end of it. They are buying elections, they are supporting elections, and that's where we have gotten away from a true democracy. There's, I believe, one senator who is not a millionaire. The rest of them are millionaires. Well, what does that say for the rest of us, for the great unwashed, as you were?
Right. I mean, once the Supreme Court equated money with free speech, I thought they went down a very dangerous. But I want to go back to another point that you're talking about, the diverse nature of our society and how we get to know each other. One of my concerns about the polarization and the isolation, we tend more and more to isolate ourselves into similar groups, both ethnic, culturally, ideologically. I served on the Minnesota Supreme Court for almost 2 decades with Alan Page.
And in the court system for more than 3.
Yeah, and he's African American. I mean, I will tell you that was one of the most wonderful privileges that I've had in my life, to serve with a human being as good as Alan Page. I mean, it makes it very difficult to entertain superiority or culture when somebody is such a good person. And you understand, then you said, is that what is there about common humanity? What is it that makes it? So you don't look at the skin color, you don't look at the ethnic background. What is there that we have in common as human beings? And so I think we need to interact with each other more.
It's so important. I just had lunch yesterday with a gentleman that I respect a lot, an unusual man, a very bright man, Stephen Venable. And Steve has been a guest on this show. And the first time he was a guest on the show, we were talking back and forth. He's into corporations, he's into management things. And then he said something about, and as a black man, and I said, "You're black?" And he cracked up. He started laughing. Because to me, hopefully, I don't see color. And that's the problem.
Oh, but you do, you know.
I see it, but I don't see it. It doesn't make any difference to me what you look like. It makes a difference to me who you are inside. And
see, now,
that's what we seem to have drifted away from it.
And there's something about being human being. As I say, I'm finishing up the biography of Woodrow Wilson, and he was racist, unquestionably so. He could be classified a gentleman racist. And he had any number of black staff, servants in the White House. I think one was Ike Hoover. And it makes me wonder, how could he depend on someone, and someone who really treated him with respect and treated him well, but still entertained, this racist attitude of one race is superior to the other?
Because it's ingrained in a lot of us from birth, from our parents, many of whom didn't have the opportunities that we have. And they did the best that they could with us. But that's always in the background, and it's a question of whether you can rise above it or not.
So this is where, and we're going to come back to Donald Trump, where I am concerned about his modus operandi and what he's going to do long term to the country. I mean, Stephen Bannon, who's in the White House, I mean, you go back and understand his readings, writing. He's an alt-right, racist, whatever. Stephen Miller, who is on the rise in the White House, whatever, has said some horrible things.
Frightening things.
Frightening things. But yet that is coming out of the very top of the leadership in our country.
And who preceded Bannon but Manafort?
Yeah.
Again, with a track record of bigotry that goes back decades.
So I'm going to get to, and I was asked to speak in December at a kind of a salon society thing, and people were really lamenting about what's going on. And I talked about where you're going to look to for some of the leadership, and you're going to look, of course, to an Amy Klobuchar and Al Franken, whatever, but you've got to look to a John McCain, a Lindsey Graham, Rob Portman, out of Susan Collins, whatever. And Lindsey Graham is not my favorite in many ways, but he said something that has stayed with me for a long time. He said, there is a time when you have to put country above party.
True.
And there are citizens now who are very wedded to Trump, and things are not very good. They'll probably get worse. But they are those people, and I don't want to say, one of the worst things you can say to a Trump supporter is, what in the world is wrong with you? Because that is a antagonizing, superficial question. But what you've got to ask is that, at what time are you going to take a look and say, country takes precedence to party or loyalty to who I voted at last time?
Part of it, I think, is the age that we're living in. Industrial technology, the internet, things like that. We are not emphasizing in the schools history.
Yeah.
I taught a course for 6 years at Inver Hills on Holocaust and genocide, and it was oversubscribed every semester because it got very popular with the students. They had no concept of, for instance, the Armenian genocide. They knew very little about the Holocaust. And I think when we're getting away from history, when we're getting away from social sciences, when we're getting away from that aspect of education, it festers and it helps to build some of these prejudices.
Or even getting away from it in a way where you deny it. I mean, one of my fellow church members grew up Armenian. He was, at age 13 or 14, he was a slave, actually. He ultimately escaped through Russia. But we can't deny what's happened in history as we go forward.
And it's 100 years ago, and Turkey is still denying it.
Oh yeah, but maybe I'm going to ask you this question, okay? I mean, we see this divide in society, and it's and journalism is not being treated, derisively and whatever. Do you see in any way that we can get out of this, what we're in?
Unfortunately, what I see is things have to get so bad that it has to hit the core of the majority of people. And the majority of people are good people. The majority of people want to raise a family, to have a success, to have a decent job. I guess healthcare we call in there also. And I think that those are the things that we have to fight.
Yeah, I thought that would be the situation in 2007, 2008 with the Great Recession. Things were pretty bad. But it doesn't seem we learned that much out of that, how bad they were. And so,
well, if we had a president who wasn't born in Kenya, and
he wasn't born in Kenya.
I know that. That's it. But we had the Donald Trumps of the world creating these myths, these alternative facts, which are really untruths. And it just fed into a lot of people losing their jobs. Why? Because we're progressing. 20,000 people are coal miners today. 200,000 people were coal miners a decade ago. Those people have to be retrained. They have to be given jobs. They have to go into solar or wind energy and other things like that. That's society's obligation to do, not to put money in the pockets of their family.
Now, this is something that really does concern me, and I don't have the answer for it. Is that I just wonder where the jobs are going to be coming from in the future. And this is what I have a real problem with the message that's being sent out by Trump and the current administration. I mean, seeming to imply to coal miners that those jobs are coming back, and they aren't coming back.
But those jobs will never come back.
I'll give you an example right here in Minnesota. Is that I think it's Sherco 1 or Sherco 2 is being shut down and being converted to a gas operating plant. I think that Sherco coal burning employs about 150 decently well-paid workers, okay? The new plant is going to be able to produce the same amount of energy, and they're going to have 25 workers. That is a reduction in staff at the plant itself to 1/6 of what it was before, without taking into consideration those railroad and coal mining jobs that are going to disappear because there's no longer coal. And that worries me about what's going to happen to the community, Becker and others that depend on those jobs, and
that's the job of society, to look ahead and to train people for what it appears to be necessary in the future. And we have thousands of jobs that are unfilled in this country right now because people don't have the expertise to hold those jobs. We've got to train those people. We have got to make those people whole again so that they can be participants in the society.
Now, here's how I admittedly misread this last election. I mean, there was major unemployment when Obama came in as president. And over the period of his 8 years, unemployment went down, down, down. So it was down to 4.9% at the time of the election. I thought the public response is, well, he has, restored employment, whatever. But what I failed to pick up is the jobs that came back were not the same as the jobs that were lost.
And
they were lower paying, no benefits and whatever.
Some families a person had to take two jobs to make up for, if at all, what they were earning in one job before. That's a statistic that's a difficult statistic.
Here's what Thomas Frank
fathom.
talked about this phenomenon in society. He said, first, when the crush came, the wife went to work, okay? And then is that when they still were pinched, is that they overextended on their credit cards. And then they used the equity in the mortgage in their house. And all of those have been now utilized to the maximum. And so the question is the fear and concern, what's going to happen there?
Where do we go to next? And that is a real fear. I want to commend you, while we still have time here, for the great job that was done by the Capital Restoration Committee, of which you were a very, very vocal part.
I don't want to dwell on that, except
and
that
I don't either, because you said something about Justice Page, and I want to point out that we have our first Jewish justice in the history of this state on the Supreme Court right now, and he's a brilliant man, David Strauss.
Probably conservative.
Probably so far to the right of my philosophy
he
that we
for
wouldn't
Clarence
agree.
Thomas, sir.
I know that, and he calls things as he sees them. He is an honest broker, and as you were on the court, as Page was on the court, as other justices are and have been on the court, which gave our Supreme Court the wonderful reputation that it had nationwide and to some degree worldwide, and you certainly have taught all over the world. But it looks like it was...
He's going to go to the Eighth Circuit.
He's going to go to the Eighth Circuit, and before him we had Mimi
Mimi Wright.
Right,
I
and-
set you
and
up a
she
little
left
bit
us.
on the David Strauss thing. I mean, he's a dear colleague. As we speak, I've just finished up a letter of support from Alan Page, Helen Meyer, and myself, extolling the very, very outstanding qualities of David Strauss. And
An ethical man.
an ethical,
A brilliant man.
and he thinks about the law. He engages in conversation. Actually, when I was on the court, he was probably as close to me as anybody else. And when I left, he was close to Alan Page. I mean, so he worked well internally. So I'm completely
Integrity is
yeah,
what.
and
a
hard
word we
work
can use.
and brings objectivity to the law. What's interesting about that is that I think he's going to be very lucky that someone like him will wind up on the court. But the thing is that then Dayton will have another appointee on the court, and that is as big of issue for me as is David going on to the Eighth Circuit. How are you going to shape and this is big time stuff, because one attorney who's liberal, public defense oriented, whatever, said a big gap is going to be left on the court because of the intellectual honesty and integrity that Strauss has brought to the legal issues on the court. And so I'm undoubtedly that Dayton will appoint somebody who's more liberal or moderate than David Strauss, but that's not enough. He has to appoint somebody that has the same intellectual rigor and commitment to the law that a David Strauss has.
I think that's, a very valid point, and we just can't have a one-sided court. We can't even have a Supreme Court as we have now, which is so totally predictable in 95% of the time. Yes, we need diversity. We need diversity in the court. We need diversity in our society. We need diversity in finance. We need diversity, period. And we need diversity also in the last minute and 20 seconds we have of
Well, I
this.
mean, one thing is that I do from inside sources here that some of the lower court nominees appointments coming from the Trump administration, they're really pretty good people, and is that they approach the law and they're not all necessarily ideologues. I am concerned about the appointment to the Supreme Court in Neil Gorsuch. I mean, his record in the judiciary is that he is surely as conservative. There are people who say that he is going to be actually more conservative than Antonin Scalia.
I happen to be one who believes that.
Who he replaced. And that's not good for the country when you have the court so ideologically divided and you have a philosophy on the court that is so different than the majority of the people. That worries me about the future of the judiciary.
And we've run through a half an hour already, Judge, and there's so much we haven't talked about. So we got to have you back very, very soon.
How much of what we talked about is going to be irrelevant by Monday or Tuesday with
could
the
be.
onslaught of events?
Justice Paul Anderson, as always, in your debt.
Thank you, sir.